Hello, everyone here, and if anyone's watching on Facebook, today I'm going to talk a little bit about deception detection. A couple months ago, I did a class, behavior profiling, deception detection, and I didn't really go into as much detail about deception detection, how to notice it, as much as I did the profiling, because I like the profiling, but it's just as important that you learn the deception stuff and how it works. So all I was going to do today is give a taste, because I've been asked to do a class on it, another class, like break it out into 2.5, 3 hour class on deception, and then one with a little bit of elicitation, and then a class on profiling. So to break it out and give more. Now, as we get started, one of the interesting things is, if you want this to work and you really want to pick it up, there's something you have to do that I have no control over. And that is, you have to practice the skills. If this was a little bit longer, we would break up into small groups, on breakout rooms here on Zoom, and do the exercise, right? Because it's a skill-based program. And you get the skills by doing it, not reading about it, not saying that's really cool. That's how many times you went to a seminar I did this weekend, right? And you take copious notes of whatever the trainer, this person's saying. And it's really cool. And then you get home, life gets in the way. Your dogs bother you. In my case, the birds or the horses, the cat, the wife. I'm not being judgmental, but life gets in the way, right? And then a few months later, you pick up the notes, either the manual they handed out or the notes, and you go, what was that again? What was that? And you don't remember, right? And when it comes to teaching this stuff, I said before, I never thought I would teach this. I was blessed to go through they call it hostage negotiation. When I went through it, it was just changing to crisis negotiation at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. And I got to hang around with not hang around, but spend some time talking to the guy that does the profiling, kind of started the profiling course. So it was a fascinating place to be. And the way to sum it up is, Quantico, the FBI Academy, is at the back of a Marine base. So first you got to go through the Marine base to get to Quantico. So it's kind of interesting. But anyway, it was a cool experience, and I think I was the only, maybe one other out of the 50 people that were in the class, that was not a badged police officer. Right? Everybody else they were cops. There was another psychologist I know and a social worker, but they worked directly with the police department, right? And so they were badged, if that makes sense, right? Another way to sum it up, I was the only guy there that didn't have to check a weapon when you came into the base, right? Because they all had to check their weapons. Because it's always interesting in America, there's, the Second Amendment, the right to, and I'm a gun guy, bear arms and all that. The one place you can't carry a weapon in the United States is on a military base. And these are people that are trained in it. That's a discussion, but it's kind of cool. But anyway, while I was there, it was kind of cool hanging around with people. I got to see how they train, and it'll tie into what we're doing, which is the way they train, right? They spend and it kind of fit my model. And in fact, a couple of their students went through my class when I was doing it in Washington, D.C. And they said, wow, you teach like they do at the academy, which is short bits of information, data information. Here's this, this, and this, and a whole lot of go do the exercise. Go do the exercise, which kind of makes sense, because the way you get a skill in is by doing it, not thinking about it, not doing that. And the guy running the class, because a couple people there go like, couldn't you just give us more information, spend less time on that? And he goes, the last thing I want is you're in the middle of a negotiation with a bank robber and you have to refer to your notes, right? And he goes, that comes from SWAT. They're not checking anything. They've done that scenario 1,000 times. So when they're doing that. So, and I love that if you want to learn it, because I do that at conferences, I'm guilty of it. You go there, it's really cool. But they don't do any practice, so it doesn't get in your head. And then when you go to remember it, it's not in your physiology, right? And so, to me, that's fascinating. The other cool thing about it is, as they learn the skills, it was a couple-week class, 3 weeks, I think. And you would go out on the base, and in the back of the base, they had an entire town, right, built, right, a small town, right? But there was a bank, like a bigger grocery store, like kind of grocery department store, that was a small like 7-Eleven, a school, right? Over in the back, they had an airplane and all this. And the reason they had that, when they would do their scenarios, they would do it it's a bank robbery. You're at the bank. You had to pull up, practice it, put up your command post, do all the stuff, coordinate with SWAT, and all the stuff that you'd have to do if it was a real situation. And they said the reason we do that is hopefully you never have to deal with a situation like this or a school shooting, but it will help if, especially as the negotiator or the person trying to get information, which that's the negotiator's job, is just to get the information that the SWAT team and the site commander can use. So, I'm like, this is really cool, right? And I got to be involved in a couple. And I always tell this story. I just like telling the story, and I'm not in a hurry today, is, the reason I was there, they asked me if they invited me to the class, and they fed you and everything. You stayed on the base. And the only thing they asked of me was give some feedback at the end, right? Anything from your viewpoint, from what you've been doing all these years. And they knew, scary part, when I went to talk to the guy about going, he knew everything about me, right? Started saying where I went to high school. Then I had to think, wait a minute, it's the FBI, right? You probably have my tax records in front of him, right? But we were having fun with it, and beginning to incorporate the skills, right? Because again, you want to take this into your physiology. And so they started the class, interestingly enough, you're going to do deception, detection, or profiling, is what stops people from being effective. The first level, of course, is thinking you already know it. And I see this in the hypnosis world. Oh my God. Hypnosis, NLP world, coaching world, they're like, I know that. I'm like, because I was at the conferences last weekend, and I said to a guy, because he was kind of saying that, I said, well, I'll bet you $100 you're not good. You haven't seen what I'm I'm sure I know it. Right? He was a Canadian guy, and I went, unless you've been to what do they call it? Their CIA or their version of the FBI, or down to Quantico, I guarantee you haven't seen some of this information, right? And they don't like it. Back in the day, they were much more protective of it because it's very powerful. And so they started with saying, they can't tell you what's a good negotiator, a good profiler, except for the fact they have to be a good listener. First and foremost, right? You have to STF you, right? STF you in your own head about you. It's not about you. You're about gathering information, right? And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. And not presenting with power. And again, everybody in the room is FBI agents and cops from all over the world. They're used to showing up and demonstrating their power. You see it on the Facebook videos all the time. It's like, of course they're going to do that. That's their job. But he said, so we can't tell you, necessarily, who's a good listener. It's a skill set you have to learn. But he goes, we've studied, and we can tell you who's a bad listener. Right? Number one is police officers. Right? Number two is medical doctors. Number three is teachers, for our friend Michelle, right? Number four is parents. And he goes, so people in the room are getting upset. And he goes, but each one of those, he had a couple others, but each one of those he described as problem solvers. You're a police officer, you're some kind of law enforcement, you roll up on a scene, your number one job is to secure the scene and then begin to gather information, not the other way around, right? So because if you got carjacked, when the cops show up, you want them to thump the guy that took your car or find your car right away. You don't want the cop to go, that's interesting. I wonder what was the socioeconomic structure that made this person go to these lengths. It's like, same with medical doctors. If anybody here has friends that are medical doctors, have been around it, when they go through their training, somewhat psychology too, is when you're going through triage training, it's get as much information as least amount of time as possible, make a decision, go to the next. Right? It's why there's so many misdiagnoses. So, and of course, people that are teachers or been around teaching, you got 30 students in the room, if you're lucky, not more than that down here in America anyway. Because I think in my county, the average classroom is 36. That's a lot of kids to manage, right? And so someone comes up to talk to you. You're just trying to assess what's going on, what's the problem, here's a solution, because I got, 35 other kids I'm dealing with, right? And so I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And I would put psychologists in that room of not being a good listener, hypnotists and coaches. And some people want to get defensive, but especially if you've been in the field a while. You have that when someone if you've been a hypnotist for a while and you've done a lot of weight loss, someone comes to you about weight loss, I would probably guess you're gathering some information, but you're already deciding what you're going to do. Especially if you got a busy practice and you got an hour, 45-minute session or whatever, right? So we spent the first few days just on active listening skills. It was kind of fun to be reminded of that. And then again, it was all exercises. So I'm just going to go over some info and have some fun with this that you can begin to use. Now, the advantage we have now is, of course, with the internet, you can do a lot of the stuff I'll be talking about. You can just go watch some videos, right? You can pull up some information and do it that way. And again, this is just a highlight. We're just kind of doing an overview and having some fun with it, right? So anyway, the first thing to remember, and lastly, why I never teach this kind of stuff, or I've only started teaching it lately, is A, other people are doing it, and B, I didn't do it because, to be honest with you, as I said at this conference, I've met some of the best people in the world at the hypnosis events, some NLP events, coaching things. I met great people. And I met some of the most manipulative, self-serving people I've ever seen. And they take I always say the basic NLP, even more than hypnosis, but the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, how a person's brain's operating through how it's sorting information toward, away from that stuff, mirroring and matching, asking specific question. To me, that's like an X-ray, right? People, when it first broke on the scene, even like a lot of the psychologists were like, this is like an X-ray into someone. You're not going into theory, you're going in, how do you think? I don't care if you got mommy issues, how are you thinking about the mommy issue or the daddy issue, right? So it's like, interesting. So when you add this stuff, the deception detection and the behavioral profiling, it's like an MRI. You're getting a real live, living version of what's going on with the person in front of you. And again, especially, hopefully you've been trained in hypnosis and NLP, so you understand a lot of this when we get into deception detection, it's subconscious responses. That's all it is, right? So as we get started, first thing, now after I got you in here, I'll say it's kind of a misnomer. I didn't do a bait and switch, but it's kind of a misnomer, detection deception. There is no such thing as a lie detector test. Absolutely not. You can't tell. Anyone that, even going back, and please, I kind of liked the show. I thought it was funny, but don't mention lie to me. Yeah, everybody who's trained in this goes, good show, bullshit premise, right? Because you're analyzing when you talk to somebody, stress markers. That's all it is. All of these things are stress tests. Just like if you ever had to take a polygraph exam, it's just monitoring stress, the skin response, your heart rate, your breathing pattern, things like that. And it's based on the person asking the questions, right? It's all interpretive. That's why it's not allowed in any state in America or province in Canada or England. It's in most Western countries. It's inadmissible, right? So you're looking for stress, right? Because what happens if somebody's not being totally truthful, it's not that they're necessarily lying. It's just that their stress goes up, right? So that's kind of an overview, right? Now I'm going to give you like a few things that a few physical things that you can look for that's kind of in a nutshell, right? And then a few verbal things. It's not the whole class, but it's kind of interesting. And again, this is one of those topics that it's so easy to go into the weeds, to go in to look for the microscopic aspects of it, with charts and flows and this and I don't know about everybody else. I don't have time for that, right? I like information that works. What can we do? And what's the minimum you have to do to begin to do this, right? And so there's a couple things, right? For physical. And again, you're just judging whether that person is in stress, right? And the number one thing physically that you can begin to look for is, first of all, what's the baseline? So if I was talking to Bruce or Maria or Maya, you got to gather info. It's why you do see the right stuff on the cop shows where they spend time just talking to people, right? Because that's where you're getting the baseline of how they breathe, their speech patterns, their physiological movements, right? Because that's the baseline, right? So you're only really looking for when things deviate from the baseline. Yeah, it could either speed up or go down. Because again, when your brain's under stress, what begins to happen is you jump into the prefrontal cortex, so you're thinking, right? But it does different things in your midbrain, which is the physiological response that you really can't control, right? You're going to do certain things, right? And so what can you look for if you're talking to somebody? If you get somewhat of a baseline, right? Number one is blink rate. When you're nervous, you blink a little more, right? Could be you're making pictures, it could be you're clearing. It's just it's what it is. Your midbrain's gone on alert because you're under stress, so your brain's searching for threat, so you can't control it, right? Now, unless you learn it, it's another reason I didn't want to learn it. There's enough pathology out there. It's like, and it's just the blink rate. It's not eye contact, right? There's two things that you still see these body language experts teach. One is eye contact, and the other is crossing arms. Furthest thing from the truth that you could find, because it depends. There's certain people that make a lot of eye contact, and there's other people that make very little eye contact. And if you don't have a baseline, you don't know. So eye contact is not relevant for what we're doing, but blink rate is. So if you're gathering the information at the beginning, all of the stuff, you're like noticing, are they blink? Some people blink fast. And again, it's all in context. If it's someone, if Bruce had on contacts, your eyes might be different, right? Things like that. So anyway, but it's blink rate, right? And part of it too is it buys time in your brain to get a response, right? So you're looking at the person, you can notice their blink rate. The second thing you notice is their mouth, right? Because it's, how can you tell someone's under stress, and what's the big markers, right? There are a couple of things that people look for. One is lip pursing, lip pursing, right? So how's that sound to you there, Maria? Does that sound good? And you say, yep. Purse your lips because there's more you want to say, or it's not complete. Let's say if you're doing this for sales, Bruce, and they go, yeah, that sounds like a good deal. Then well, there might be some hesitancy going on in there, right? So it's the pursing of the lips. That one's easy. The other thing is, and I will try to keep my mind out of the gutter when I say that, is mouth insertion. Sorry, I'm politically incorrect. But when people, unless it's their baseline, if suddenly and you're talking to them, you know, I start chewing on their pencil, right? I would even say sometimes biting their nails. Again, if it's not in their baseline, if you were talking, they're biting their nails, it's just a nervous habit, but it's self-soothing. And this is why. So when you're under stress, you're going to self-soothe. You're going to bite your fingernails. You might chew on your pen, you know, or you'll bite on your lip. That one's pretty obvious, you know. If I can say the name right, Tanja. Anyway, you know, if I said something and I go, is that good? Does it sound like we can move forward? You go, mm-hmm. And as you're biting your lip, I mean, it's the old, you're biting your lip not to say something, right? And then the last with the face, you got your eyes, you know, the blink rate, and does the facial expressions match? In other words, and you see this a lot, right? You see it with actors. The difference between a great actor and a mediocre actor is great actors smile and get angry with their eyes, right? As opposed to a lot of times you see models, they have a beautiful smile, but maybe because I'm training a little bit, it's like, it's bullshit. It's too practiced. The other thing with, does the smiling or frowning or anything match the eyes? The second is, let's say somebody smiles, if it's a real smile, they're thinking about something funny, you know, and they really I can't do it right now. They really get a good smile going on. It fades as the conversation goes on, right? As opposed to if it's a practiced response, the minute like, okay, bought it, they drop the face, right? It's that, you know, it's not so much the buildup, but it's that, does the facial expression like just fade instead of just click off, you know, unless of course you did something to put them in even more stress. So those are the biggest with the face, right? So what we're going to do is move down the body, right? So face, the second for deception detection is the shoulders. And again, you got to get a baseline, right? And I want everybody to do this, right? We don't have time to break out. I'm going to speed up here. But if you're sitting there, sit up, right? And then let's say someone asks you a question, right? And shrug both shoulders. Both shoulders, right? Okay. It gives you some kind of response inside. As opposed to, I ask you a question and you only raise your one shoulder. Usually you'll tip your head that way, right? Is it a different response, right? It's a physiological response. I don't know what the info is, whether it's true, false, or maybe you're trying to think of stuff, right? So you have the eyes, the mouth, and then the shoulders. That's a pretty big one, right? And it's, you know, and again, if you got to get a baseline, if they shrug their shoulders a lot, it's no big deal. But if they shrug one shoulder, it's, you know, it says something, right? Excuse me. And then with that then we're going to drop into the hands, right? And again, the hands and the feet are the best detectors because they're farther away from your brain. They go on autopilot. They're your first response to threat, to fight off something, to run away, right? And so two things. The easiest with the hands is, and everyone go like this. I ask a question and say you're going to give me the response. And as you're giving the response in your mind, open your hands like, right? Now do the same thing in your head, but just kind of, don't make a fist, but just kind of close your hands as you're answering the question, right? It's called flexion, digital flexion. When you do this is generally more, and we pick that up and people go, this is, you know, the thing, as opposed to the clutching, where you, and I'm not saying make a fist, that's different, but you just close your arm. And again, it's got to be a baseline. So you're watching the baseline. And when you see a shift, you begin to know. So that's the quickest things with hands. There's more, right? And then lastly is your feet, which is the farthest away from your body. As you're talking to somebody, are their feet facing you or pointed toward you? or off to the side, right? Because you'll put your feet towards something that gets your attention. If your feet are off to the side, you're looking, your attention is elsewhere. You're looking for an escape. Again, this is your subconscious kicking in. It's like, uh-oh, it's getting uncomfortable. I need to leave, right? So are the feet pointed toward you as you're asking the question? Or especially if they point toward you, and then as the questions go on, they point away, right? And then lastly, excuse me, is it's called the foot drop, right? Which is somebody standing there, and if they take their dominant foot, whichever, right or left, and it drops back, right? It's dropped back. It's combat stance. You're going to fight, or you're going to push off, you're going to run, you're going to do something else. It's really cool. If their hips and that face outward and they do the drop, you see it, some of the good actors do it in shows where they do that before they run. In some show, I think it was FBI, so they had good consultants that said, have the suspect kind of not face away, but turn his hips and his feet this way before they ask a couple more questions, then he takes off, right? I'm like, because that's how you do it, right? And police officers really watch for that, right? And rightfully so. They may be gearing up to kick you or to jump at you and fight, right? I know I saw one where a guy got tased. They were making it bad, but if you watched his movements, the guy's shoulders went up, his whole body tightened, and his foot dropped. It's like it was a nighttime traffic stop. I could see why he got tased. Not to be callous, but the cops out there all alone, especially in most of America. It's not like New York City or Philly or Chicago where there's a bunch of, even then they're by themselves, right? So it's the foot drop, right? The other thing you want to do, if you're asking, we don't do interrogations, but if you were, in the rooms that they put people in, especially in high level, like what the CIA does, they never have you sit in a chair that doesn't move, right? And preferably a little bit high, right? Because, if it's a straight back chair like you get at hotels, you can't move. If it's this would be a subconscious, like, does it make sense to people, right? Right. And then they'll also look at, like, if, again, it's not in the baseline and suddenly, they're doing that or they begin to rock. This one doesn't, I lock the rock, but if it rock, people start rocking, or they'll tap their foot. It's a subconscious thing. Just let you know they're stressed, that you can ask more questions on that. So that's just the first level, right? And then on the next level of deception would be verbal, right? And again, when you're asking these questions, you got to get a baseline, right? And generally they talk about the biggest ones is hesitation on answering. So if you ask a question, Bruce, you locked up last night. Did you notice the X, Y, or Z? And it's just a few seconds. If there's a, pause and then they answer, it's like they would just mark that as, well, there might be more to gather info here, maybe. And again, if they don't do that all the time. Also, too, is when you ask someone a question, a lot of people will repeat the question, but it's very important to track whether it's just part of it. Last night, where were you last night? Last night. And then they answer. That may not be deceptive. It's last night. If they repeat the whole question, the guys that teach this say, in their brain, they're formulating the answer. They're buying time, right? It's also why in police and certain interrogations, they don't like lawyers in the room, because they know the law and they'll tell the person to, the investigator, shut up, let the guy think about it for a minute, So there's the hesitancy, right? And again, if they're going to if they repeat the whole question, that's a bigger hesitancy, right? If they only repeat part of it, like last night, okay, because then Bruce, where were you last night? If you just went last night, well, he's got a whole day to go through, right? And again, it's just a way of doing it. The big one, and it's true, we see it a lot with kids, is reversing the question. You know, so your manager goes, I'll pick on Bruce. Manager goes, so Bruce, what'd you do last night after you locked up? The person goes, what did you do last night after we locked up? Right? It's like it's turning the question back on the, you know, right? So that's that reversing the question. And then the other big one is for a simple question, and this takes practice, I guess. I've never done it that much, but for a simple question, again, it goes back to the baseline. How do they usually talk? Is the response overly practiced? Bruce went, well, I locked up about 8, so I left at what, 8:07. And again, if that's his normal, it's fine. I left at 8:07, and I decided to get a cup of coffee at the bodega on the corner. And then, I mean, if it's way very detailed, it's like they practice this in their mind, right? And with that, it's somewhat flat affect as they repeat it, right? Because as they say in acting, my other profession, knowing the lines is good. Well, you got to know the lines. Knowing the lines, but making it real. You know, worst thing I hear as an actor, if you do something and they go, well, I could tell you know the lines. You know, don't believe anything Maria out in California knows that's every actor's nightmare. It's like, okay, well, it means you didn't believe me. You know, which says a lot about me because I always play serial killers. But, you know, so anyway, so there's being too detailed, right? The other thing is excluding details, right? That maybe they should know. You know, like, well, okay, Bruce, then when you left, how'd you get home? Well, I just went home. Well, how? It would be more of a normal answer to go the same way I always do. I got my car, I took, you know, in his case, you know, A1A down to the corner and did this, and this. Okay, fine, right? So, you know, and then the last thing we can do, because I don't want to keep everybody's time, but I find this stuff fascinating, is, especially, this is more for, well, no, for anything. Anybody here got kids? If you ever talk to kids, this one's good, is minimizing the event. You know, minimizing the event. You know, if someone was accused of assault, they would say, well, it's terrible that someone got hurt. Right? Rape would go to, oh, it's a bummer somebody was be sexually harassed. Right? And they're trying to minimize the thing, right? They're trying to minimize it, right? Then also with that is depersonalization. The most famous, to me, I don't know how old people are, and if you're from America, but is, and he did it this way. It was one of my favorite politicians, Bill Clinton. Right? Again, closed hands. I did not have sex with that woman. Now, during the thing, he's been calling her Monica the whole time. Oh, sexual relations. Right? And he didn't say, and he said did not. Generally, when he talks, it's called contractions. If you're the kind of person that goes, I didn't do this, I didn't do that, I didn't, you know, I wouldn't do that, and it goes to would not or could not, or in his case, did not instead of didn't. I didn't have, you know, more common response would be to have done I didn't have sex with an open hand. I didn't, you know, because then his best defense was depends on what your definition of sex is. You can tell he's a Yale trained lawyer, right? But it's like, so you minimize the event and you depersonalize it, right? And kind of the last one, this is more for if someone was accused of something, you know, again, I'll pick on Bruce. So Bruce, if somebody took like that $20 from the register, what do you got to think happened? What do you think should happen to him? right? And if a typical response should be, well, they should be fired, they stole. As opposed to, well, they should be written up, maybe counseled, you know, and have someone else, you know, double check, because it could have been an honest mistake. And well, you know, if they went like this, it could have been an honest mistake, right? So they're trying to minimize the punishment. Kids do it a lot, you know, you know. So that's just a little bit on that. And then lastly, well, I will close with the fact that usually they always say all of these things, the responses will happen within 5 seconds of when you ask the question, right? Maybe next, in a couple weeks, I'll do one on how you elicit info so it stops that, right? There's an easy way to elicit the information that doesn't put up as many stop signs or barriers, right? So again, it's really cool information. And I'm starting to share it now, and I like it because I see how powerful it is. Bad part is, if you study this kind of stuff, you'll never look at the world the same way again. And I don't mean politicians. I'm so cynical. It's their job to lie. So it's like, you know, but you know, you just see it everywhere. And it goes back to the old quote, never ask a question unless you want the answer. Right? I think it's Shakespeare. I don't know. He said everything else. So we could say he said that, right? But if you ask a question, you may get an answer, right? And then lastly, when we do this, now I sound like Bill Clinton. And one more thing, is the fact that we have what they call truth bias, right? Which is if you like someone, you will default to their telling the truth. It's how people get sucked into narcissistic relationships, cults, because at first they're nice. So you're going to assume they're telling the truth, right? And I'm not saying be that skeptical, but a true con man, his first job is to get you to like him, to think you're like him, he's like you, right? Because then you're going to assume he's telling the truth, or her. It's not just men, you know. Well, in fact, the research says there's just as many narcissistic women as men. Yeah, the quote is by Morgan Freeman or Keanu Reeves, because they've said everything on the face of the earth. You know. So anyway, there's that. Let me take the pen off, and I'm still recording. Does anybody have anything, quote, comment, something they could say that they don't mind going on camera and out to Facebook land? No? Quiet group. Okay, let me stop the Facebook Live. All right, and stop the recording. Where's my button?